It is, like we said, a true honor to host some really smart people, to be honest, in our event today. And the gentleman that is about to join us on stage is certainly one of them. But before I introduce Michael Shellenberger, who I was really surprised to learn has actually very good Spanish. He was even talking to the press today in Spanish. So I should maybe just refer to him as Miguel Shellenberger moving forward. But his keynote will begin in just a few minutes. But before that, let me just break down the remaining agenda for the day, because right after Michael, we will have a short break. And after his presentation, we will introduce a very interesting academic presentation hosted by Luis Ignacio Gomez about a recovery project for the Antigua Lake. Now, as you know, we talk about climate policy, but conservation is, I guess, another key element of any environmentalist's agenda. And this should also be tackled with the principles of a free society, like we are indeed trying to do in an event like this. That will be followed by a roundtable discussion about energy in search of the perfect mix, where we will have Pablo Losada, a professor at UFM, joined by Manuel Fernández Ordóñez. He's the director of the Peter Hoover Institute at the University of the Desperides, and Alberto Gómez, the co-founder at Adara Ventures, will be also part of that panel. So it's quite the star lineup. And 7:30, our closing keynote will be Entropy, Fuels, and the Theory of Wealth, the beginning of the correlation of crisis-ridden energy policies, by yours truly, John Constable. So we do have quite the remarkable lineup. We're just sitting at the middle of everything we have ahead of us. So please enjoy this second half of the session as much as I know that all of you have done in the first half of this event. So it's siesta time for many in Spain, but definitely not for us here at the San Pablo CEU University today. And before we get the introduction going, like I did at the top of the event, let me once again thank for their collaboration. Our sponsors are Rising Tide, the Climate and Freedom Project at the Grace Richardson Fund, and the CEUCEFAS think tank, as well as, of course, the free organization setting this event up, Instituto Juan de Mariana, Universidad de las Desperides, and UFM, and, of course, each and every single one of you for being here with us. I am glad to announce that this forum will not be just the first forum, but and last, but rather just the first on a series of them. And we stand here ready to announce that we will be meeting again next year in 2026 for more discussions on climate, energy, and economics. So please remember to keep in touch with us, follow our social media accounts, register in our newsletter, and just follow our publications anywhere you can find us. So having said that, it is now my pleasure to welcome one of the most influential and courageous public intellectuals in today's climate and energy debate. Michael, or Miguel, Shellenberger has challenged dominant narratives with his rigorous data, his journalistic integrity, and an unwavering commitment to human progress. Through his work as a researcher, author, and advocate for technological innovation, particularly in the fields of nuclear energy, environmental policy, and urban resilience, he has pushed us to rethink assumptions and confront uncomfortable truths, like some of those that will be discussed in today's session. His voice has shaped discussions worldwide, always defending prosperity, scientific rigor, and solutions rooted in freedom rather than the politics of fear. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Michael Shellenberger.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. All right. Let's start with the big new problem, climate anxiety. 1 out of 5 UK children report nightmares about climate change. Good news is college campuses are offering therapy for anxiety over climate change, according to the Washington Post. Climate disasters will now strain our mental health system. It's time to adapt. Here's what you can do to cope with your anxiety about climate change. Climate change is keeping therapists up at night. How psychedelic therapy may help with climate change anxiety. I'm not so sure about that one. Tripping on LSD and thinking about climate change doesn't seem like a recipe for your anxiety to me. Nonetheless, maybe a climate cafe will help ease the anxiety of planetary crisis. What is the climate story? You all know this story very well by now. World is getting warmer, 1.5 1.1 or 1.15 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial temperatures. Carbon dioxide accumulated in the atmosphere. Sea levels are not just rising, but an accelerated rise, according to the IPCC. Rising seas will erase more cities by 2050, new research shows. Look at that. Vietnam, almost erased off the planet. Floods are being caused by climate change, according to the news media. Heat waves are going up because of climate change. Wildfires because of climate change. And sea ice. Sea ice is rapidly declining in the Arctics, according to Google's AI and all the main sources upon which it relies. And you are making this island disappear. All the atolls, those are the volcanic islands like the Maldives, they're disappearing. The CNN reminded us a few years ago, great global warming is killing the Great Barrier Reef. Hurricane frequency is on the rise, according to Financial Times. Polar bears are going extinct. The biggest hurricanes, category 4 and 5 hurricanes, are also increasing since 1980, and therefore, naturally, insurance premiums rose for 29 consecutive quarters. How the climate crisis became an insurance crisis, according to the New York Times. Obviously, nuclear power isn't going to be a solution to any of this because of Chernobyl, the HBO show. And we can just rely on renewables because their cost is coming down. And finally, last but not least, you'll all need to go vegan because that's what Greta did. This is the track that we're on. It's called Representative Climate Projection? I'm looking at Bjorn. RCP? Representative Climate Pathway, RCP 8.5. That's the pathway that we are on according to the vast majority of studies that are being produced about climate change. A new study calculates that climate change's economic bite will hit $38 billion a year by the year 2049. And therefore, we need to degrow our economies, meaning we need to force the economies to go into economic depression. That's really how we're going to solve climate change. Or maybe not. Maybe not so fast. Let's take a look at some other data here. Spain, carbon emissions peaked about 20 years ago, and they've been declining rapidly ever since. United Kingdom, declining really since the 70s. France, since the 70s. United States, also since the earlier part of the century. In fact, over the last 10 years, carbon emissions globally have basically been flat. In fact, they had to revise down the land use emissions because they were much less significant than they had predicted. As for this famous scenario, it's completely wrong. In fact, the research shows that we could not possibly achieve this high carbon emission scenario because the transition that was predicted from the 1970s on, that we would be moving from coal to natural gas, is well underway. So it's literally impossible for us to hit this upper bound, RCP 8.5. According to NASA scientists, Bjorn stole my thunder and already pointed out that wildfires have declined by 25%. I would only add here that fire is not necessarily bad. So I don't want to be contributing to this idea that fire in landscapes is bad. We need fires in many of our forests. When the first Europeans came to California, they discovered that the forests were smoky. The Indians were setting them on fire, but the lightning was starting the fire, and there were these low-level fires across the forest floors that were necessary to burn off the underbrush and also to release the seeds that would sprout for new trees and to create the fertilizer that's necessary in so many ecosystems. So I don't want to suggest that wildfires are bad. The peak of heat waves was actually in the 1930s. Bjorn showed that great New York Times story. I went back and read all the New York Times stories from the 20th century on heat waves. And I was struck that in the 1930s, they were writing in the New York Times about these heat waves. They were still so relaxed about it. You know, they were like, yeah, people were dying on the streets and in the buildings. But I mean, it was in the middle of the Great Depression. So all the heat waves was sort of the least of their problems. By contrast, when I read about the heat waves in the New York Times a few years ago, it was genuinely apocalyptic. I mean, everybody was going to die, even though hardly anybody was dying. And I would also just point out that this graph is still hidden on the EPA website. It's very hard to find this graph because it's buried. And the previous heat wave charts that I showed are easily accessible by typing in EPA heat wave into your Google browser. And it only starts in 1960. It doesn't go back to the earlier part of the century. Flood deaths have been going down in Europe for decades. One of my favorite things about European towns is when they have on the building markers, when they showed like the floods reached to this level in 1650 or, got up to here in 1790 or wherever it was. And so flood deaths have clearly gone down, no doubt about it. Even The Guardian now admits that there has been no loss of Arctic sea ice in 20 years. So we have not seen this huge decline in sea ice. The Google AI is wrong. Apparently, thought they had overweight The Guardian, apparently not. And the Great Barrier Reef is now at its record high levels of coral in 36 years. In fact, they've only been measuring the coral on the Great Barrier Reef for 36 years. So we don't know. It might be a record amount of coral on the Great Barrier Reef for much longer than that. As for those island atolls that are supposedly disappearing into the ocean, 89% of them had increased in size or stayed the same size. This is a study that was done in 2018. So 90% of islands increased in size or stayed the same size. You are definitely not making the islands disappear. The New York Times called this a surprising climate find. They did that a full 6 years after the original study was published. So very surprising. The most surprising thing is the New York Times didn't see it fit to cover the study until 6 years after. 6 years after it had published a series of alarming reports about climate change. As for sea level rise, nobody from the Netherlands is worried about it. Some parts of the Netherlands are 7 meters below sea level rise, and yet somehow the Dutch have managed to become the richest people in human history. And this gets at a core problem with the entire climate narrative. The core problem is that any adversity is catastrophic for human beings. But that is not, in fact, the story of human development. The story of human development is a process of overcoming adversities, facing adversities. In fact, in Arnold Toynbee's great history of civilizations, he says this is what characterizes successful civilizations are precisely the ones that confront adversity and overcome them. So the idea that we would be facing some significant adversity, which we are not facing in the case of climate change, but even if we were, the idea that we would somehow be helpless in front of this challenge is absurd given everything we know about the things we've overcome in human history. I would go so far to say that maybe the fact that the Dutch managed to create a livable environment in a place that was swampy and full of water may have had something to do with their incredible success. All the technological ingenuity required to live in a place like the Netherlands, no doubt in my mind, contributed to having created one of the great engineering cultures of the world. And as you can see here, the bottom part of the map is just showing that they've actually created significant amount of land in that part by draining those wetlands. What about floods? In fact, the flood damage as a proportion of GDP has declined significantly. This graph from the great Roger Pelkey Jr. As Bjorn noted, continental U.S. landfalling hurricanes 1900 2025, no trend, or in fact, it does show a slight downward trend. Droughts, no increase of droughts. Global warming losses as a percent of GDP has also declined. And of course, the death rate has plummeted, also as Bjorn showed. And this, of course, is not accounting for the quadrupling of population during that same period. In fact, the cost of disasters is declining as a share of GDP everywhere in the world. We'll get to how they get away with these tricks in a minute. And this shows that what actually constitutes a disaster, in other words, for something to go from being just an extreme weather event to being categorized as a disaster, according to the MDAT database that run by Belgians, you have to have a certain number of deaths and a certain amount of damage. So because the deaths have gone down so much and the damage costs have declined so much, that the number of events that are categorized as disasters has gone down. What about renewables? Indeed, the cost of a solar panel when it's producing electricity and wind when it's producing electricity has plummeted. But as also noted earlier, somehow, for some reason that we'll explore, as renewables become a larger part of your generation, costs rise. So one of the paradoxes that we'll need to understand here. What about that amazing study that predicted $38 trillion in costs by 2049? It was retracted 2 weeks ago. Happily, some of the news media actually covered this, but it was riddled with so many errors that the authors felt that they just needed to retract it. So this all raises the question of how in the world did they get away with this for so long? How in the world did we go for 35 years of just the most hysterical apocalyptic coverage of a problem that we struggle to find evidence of in the real world beyond the warming? The first is just a selective presentation of the data. What is Financial Times doing in here? they're just misrepresenting better hurricane detection as rising frequency. As Bjorn noted, satellites are a relatively recent invention, and so when you get more satellites, you're able to detect more hurricanes. Before satellites, you just go to the coast and look out there. Maybe that's a hurricane over there. That's why we rely on landfalling hurricane data rather than hurricane frequency overall. So this is just a gross abuse of visual presentation of data by the Financial Times, which definitely knows better. New York Times just cherry picks the post-1980 period. This is a very common trick. You'll just see them starting with a period that cannot be considered a climate trend because the period of time is just too short. Similarly, we see on fires, on heat waves, they also cherry pick starting from the 1960s, even though we have a data set going back to 1890s. Insurance companies themselves, which have a very strong interest in misrepresenting potential future damages so that they can charge more on their premiums, engage in this kind of manipulation. I'll show, this is, for me, this was sort of the last shoe to drop. For the last 5 years, have been presenting IPCC claims about sea level rise acceleration as a fact. I've been telling audiences that we know that sea level rise has accelerated. It was only a few weeks ago that I discovered that that is not at all the case. There was a study published by a couple of Dutch authors where they look at the only long-term measurement of sea level rise, which is tide gauge data. That's data collected exactly the way you'd imagine. There's just tide gauges that measure tides, and it goes back, actually goes all the way back to the 1850s. And when you look at that data set, they find no acceleration. Sea levels are definitely rising, but they've seen no acceleration on climactic timelines. So what do? I went back and forth. I have 50 emails between me and one of the main sea level rise scientists where he all but confesses his tricks. They basically introduce different sources of data other than tide gauge data into models, salt marsh data, satellite data, and then they tweak the assumptions, even though when you go into the papers that are doing the modeling of sea level rise, they say that the models can be, depending on the assumptions of the model, you can show acceleration, linearity, or deceleration. And yet when you get to the IPCC report, they claim it's only acceleration. And when I asked the scientists, how can you justify an acceleration claim based on, on models that can show deceleration? He basically said, trust me, bro. That was basically it. Trust me, bro. Not in so many words, but it was all this, the usual you would imagine. I'm a great scientist. You're just a peon journalist. We know what we're doing. It was all sorts of irrational appeals to authority. But the bottom line is, sea level, there's no evidence that sea level rise is accelerating. What about the insurance companies I mentioned before? They have a strong interest in this. Look at what they're able to do with climate alarmism. They're able to fleece people that are buying insurance when they're able to charge significantly higher premiums. You see them raising them after 2022, 23 to 24. Thank you, Greta Thunberg. The insurance industry owes her really billions of dollars in additional profits. How did this occur? Roger Pielke Jr. broke it down. 2015, the current Prime Minister of Canada, then the former Governor of the Bank of England, said that the insurance industry was at risk of extreme weather events. He said the currently modeled losses could be undervalued by as much as 50% if recent weather trends were to prove representative. There's always those little caveats thrown in there at the end. The Bank of England releases their claims that conventional catastrophe modeling did not effectively consider a changing climate. 4 years later, the Bank of England required firms to assess their climate risks. NGOs hyped the climate risks. The financial sector, they created these little whole new bureaucracies to justify these claims. And you get an entire new climate risk industry within the existing insurance industry. It's a remarkable steeplechase of analysis to get to an outcome that the insurance industries have profited from remarkably. The other key thing in order to present an apocalyptic vision is to just ignore all of the obvious technical fixes. One of the common things you hear at climate conferences is that we say things like, people will have to adapt. I always ask myself, how could people do anything other than adapt? They would have to stop being humans. Or they say farmers will need to adapt. In other words, farmers will need to continue to be farmers and not stop being farmers. Adaptation is what the human animal excels at and has excelled at for millions of years. According to Lancet, air conditioning, who knew? Air conditioning saves 200,000 lives a year. More people die from cold than from heat, but those that die from heat, we have a very simple solution. Please just give them an air conditioner. Naturally, when the climate alarmist community realized that air conditioning was the obvious solution to climate change, they started running front page New York Times stories demonizing air conditioning. Why? Because air conditioning requires energy, and energy supposedly is bad because it gets in the way of making your apocalyptic claims. What about food production? This is from the best models created by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. You can see on the left, it's very complicated. I'm going to simplify it. This is on the left is irrigated systems, rain-fed systems. What this is showing is that, yeah, you can see in rain-fed systems, here on the right, you can get some amount, you can show a modest amount of crop yield decline in a rain-fed system under climate change. Those are the little white dots. But the technical change, those are the black dots, gets you a massive increase. So what does this mean? It means that the solution, the adaptation to climate change, is fertilizers, tractors, irrigation, chemical inputs, the same things that resulted in these massive increases of food production. We have 25% agricultural surpluses today. We produce enough food for 10 billion people. There has never been a moment on Earth where we've had so much food. That's why people are always, the reason we have so much food waste, which intuitively bothers us, is because we just are so good at producing huge quantities of food. The difference for Africans who rely, sub-Saharan Africans who rely on rain-fed systems, is they just need modern agriculture. Well, guess what the environmental movement is adamantly against? Modern agriculture. Really makes you wonder what's going on here. This also requires just ignoring the basic process of development. Why is it that we saw the cost of disasters as a percentage of GDP is going down, but dealing with disaster, the cost of disasters itself is going up when you don't account for GDP? Well, why is that? Well, as Roger Pilkey points out, when a hurricane hit Miami Beach in 1925, there was just a lot less property to be damaged than there is today. Still, when it hits today, because we're so much wealthier, it's a smaller percentage of GDP, but that development is what explains the rise of costs of disasters over the last 100 years. What about floods? Why are more people exposed to floods? More people are exposed to floods. Why is that? Well, it's because the cities that are built along rivers have gotten bigger. There's greater flood exposure, but of course that's not the end of the story, because we also have these things called flood management systems, rainwater systems, basic human development. If you just pretend like you don't understand cities, for very many years, Greta Thunberg was just showing pictures of poor countries suffering from floods, and it was going viral as though somehow for the first time in history there was all this flooding. Very few people understood that we in the rich world have elaborate flood management and rainwater systems. Also, you have to ignore land management. This is one of the best forest scientists in California. He says, climate dries the wood fuels out, extends the fire season from 6 months a year to nearly year round, but it's not the cause of the intensity of the fires. The cause of that is fire suppression and the existing debt of wood fuel. In other words, it's been the building up of wood fuel on forest floors from both the reduction in clear cutting, thanks to alternatives to paper and pulp, and also because of the suppression of fires. So we do have a great example of how to manage our forests. On the left is bad forest management. On the right is good forest management. You can see these are low-level burns. You want these low-level fires burning in your forest. You want them well managed. This is not super complicated. President Trump a few years ago said that we just need to rake the forest floors a little bit better. A little inartful, but directionally correct, as so many other things the president says. We saw this actually happen in an incredible natural experiment in 2020. We had these high-intensity fires burning the canopies and the crowns of the trees, which are terrible fires because they actually convert the entire ecosystem, the forest ecosystem, into woodland brush systems. It arrived at a well-managed forest. It was managed by a Southern California utility, which needs to manage it for its water consumption. And the fires hit a well-managed forest, and the fires dropped to the surface of the forest floor, thereby proving the hypothesis quite spectacularly. Let's take another look at this energy. Again, we're dealing with this paradox. This is something they show through the selective use of statistics. The renewables advocates show the picture on the left. They never show the picture on the right. There's a lot of reasons for this that we'll get into for why it is that renewables make electricity more expensive. The other thing they need to do is they change the methodology of inconvenient research. This is one of my favorites. Roger Pilkey, he noted that the MDAT database, again, this is the database that tracks all the disasters, incorporated the results of a July 2023 study on excess heat mortality. This significant methodological change is problematic because such data did not exist between 2022 and in 2022 only exists for Europe. This is like statistics 101 that you learn in college, right? Don't change your methodology in the middle of capturing your data. If you want to have a different methodology, introduce a different study for studying it. I can't prove this, but I predict that what happened is that this graph that Roger produced went super viral, and the climate alarmists got in touch with this Belgian data center, and they said, how do we get you to get those numbers back up again? And at this point now, they've just trashed the entire database because it didn't come up with the alarmist picture that they wanted to present. California electricity prices, we are a heavy renewables state. Our electricity prices rose between 33 and 80% more than the national average between 2015 and 2024. Again, it's clearly from the renewables, but the picture they've been presenting is that, oh, but when solar panels are producing electricity, it's a lot cheaper. So that means they have to ignore all of the hidden costs. The hidden costs of renewables were brilliantly predicted 12 years ago by a young German economist, pro-renewables, because he is German, economist named Leon Hirth. What he discovered in his modeling is that the value of wind energy to the grid declines 40% as it reaches 30% of your electricity supply. The value of solar declines by 50% when it reaches 15% of your electricity supply. Why is that? It's because you're producing electricity when you don't need it, and you're not producing it when you do need it, and the cost of storing it in batteries or shutting off or paying the producers of power to not produce the electricity when you don't need it adds significant burden to ratepayers. In fact, we saw this in Britain last year. Consumers paid almost $3 billion. $3 billion is what it is last year, and will pay $8 billion in 2030 just to shut off the 114 North Sea turbines. They're now disconnected 70% of the time. They just introducing all of this unreliable power onto the grid would wreak havoc. It would cause blackouts, it would cause blowouts. So they have to pay the people producing it not to produce it. Renewables today require more than twice the power capacity. In the past, the UK met power demand with 60 to 70 gigawatts. Today requires 120 gigawatts. In other words, the unreliable nature of renewables means you have to add a huge amount of electrical generating capacity that you just don't need. So you end up with like the most inefficient electrical system. Electricity is based on the perfect balancing of supply and demand at any given moment. Too much power, you get blowouts. Too little power, you get blackouts, as all the Spaniards in the room know. And that's why that's why it just adds all these additional costs to the system. This is not even to mention the impact ecologically. You need 379 times more land for solar than you do nuclear. How do we come up with these calculations? It's very easy. You go onto Google Maps and you can draw a little circle around any power plant in the world. And then you just simply divide the amount of power generated by that power plant by its land use size, and you get what's called a power density measurement, which is the amount of electricity produced per acre or per hectare. And that's how you can figure out this huge land burden. 420 times more land for wind than nuclear. These numbers vary around the world. We've done it all around the world. It's very easy to do. 300 to 600 times more land is what we end up finding. This is the wonderful North Atlantic right whale. There's only 340 of these magnificent mammals left remaining off the east coast of the United States. Naturally, we'll need to make them go extinct in order to build wind turbines. And that is indeed what has been going on. We were able to, all the red dots are deaths of whales, and we were able to correlate and find a very strong correlation between where the whales were being killed and where the additional boat traffic was coming for the wind farms. We also discovered that the sounds that they were making in terms of pile driving and doing sonar to put these wind turbines in was significantly higher than was allowed legally. those high volumes terrify the North Atlantic right whales. The mothers and the babies get separated, and the babies end up dying. There's a tiny number of these whales. They're already teetering on the edge of extinction. Happily, this particular industrial wind project was canceled, but this disregard for the natural environment is one of the main characteristics of renewable energy around the world. The other one, of course, is just the use of enslaved labor. All of your cheap solar panels are being made by Uyghur Muslims in China living in concentration camps. After they get done producing these solar panels, then their organs get harvested for senior members of the Communist Party to use in their bid for immortality. If you think I'm joking, just go ahead and Google BBC, Uyghur Muslims and organs. The other important thing to do is to attack all the obvious solutions to climate change. The most obvious being nuclear power. These guys will lie, steal, and cheat in order to shut down nuclear power plants. The Germans, after they shut down the nuclear power plants and the German Greens came to power, Robert Habeck, they said, well, we did a study and we found out that it was just going to be much too costly to start the nuclear power plants up again. That all turned out to be a grotesque lie. It's not expensive at all to restart a nuclear plant. It would save huge amounts of money that they spend on importing liquefied natural gas from the United States. Nonetheless, the Germans went forward with their energy suicide. All of this, despite the fact that nuclear is the safest way to make reliable electricity. People always ask, is there a mistake in your graph? Because I don't see any deaths there from nuclear compared to these other sources of energy. No, there's no mistake. It's just that there's so few deaths that they don't even register on the chart. This was from Lancet in 2007. What about nuclear waste? This is it. You can play basketball on the same court that they store the used nuclear fuel rods on. This is maybe the most shocking part of nuclear power. The Simpsons taught me that nuclear power was liquid green waste. It turns out it's just used fuel rods stored in these canisters. Some people think that you have to go and build a storage facility in the bottom of a mountain. When I started working on nuclear power, I would ask the engineers, why do we have to bury the nuclear waste? And they would say, what, are you crazy? We have to bury the nuclear waste. And I would say, okay, great. Explain to me why we have to bury the nuclear waste. Is it dangerous where it is now above ground? They would be like, no, it's not dangerous. So what are we doing here, guys? Why are we? So this is a case where I took the side of the anti-nuclear lobby in the United States and helped to kill our own plan to carve a gigantic hole into Yucca Mountain in Nevada, where people were going to make a lot of money building a hole, filling it with completely harmless nuclear waste in the name of saving the planet. These are the wind turbine blades. You can see they're being recycled here. I'm just joking. They're just putting dirt on top of them. They're never going to biodegrade. Huge, and that's just a few wind turbines. So there is no funding to decommission these monstrosities. Every nuclear power plant every nuclear power plant in the world is already paying into a fund to decommission it into the future. That does not happen with any renewable power source. So we are externalizing the cost of decommissioning renewable energy onto future generations. Nuclear power plants, for their part, are functionally immortal. They're licensed to run for 80 years in the United States, but that's just a number. You can just replace all of the major components of a nuclear power plant. The turbine wears out, put a new turbine in. The steam generator wears out, put in a new steam generator. Even if the reactor vessel needed to be replaced and they're not being worn out, these are very sturdy machines, you could replace that. That's why nuclear power plants, in my view, are some of the most valuable pieces of technology. There is some good news here. For example, Microsoft just paid to restart 3 Mile Island, which many of you may know was a reactor that kept operating even after the reactor right next to it melted down in 1979, causing a mass moral panic and resulting to the halt of construction of nuclear power plants, even though the melting of that plant proved the essential safety of nuclear power. The entire the reactor melted, the fuel dropped to the bottom of the reactor vessel, and there was no dangerous levels of radiation released. This is the right picture of how to think about energy and the environment. It is not the case that reducing our environmental impact is expensive. Reducing our environmental impact is something that we do with human development. We move from matter-dense fuels to energy-dense fuels. You walk into any given hut in sub-Saharan Africa, and the women and the children are breathing toxic smoke from the wood that the kids spent hours bringing to the village. And then it's just a miracle when they get access to liquefied petroleum gas. You ask the women what really matters to them. Is it the smoke? They say no, it's the fact I can just kind of cook a pot of beans or a pot of rice and do something else. It's a labor-saving device. That is women's liberation. Fossil fuels has been the key to women's liberation for over 100 years. And then finally, you get to a fully ecological situation. I saw this spectacular yesterday driving to Extremadura, and I drove past the nuclear plant Almaraz. And it was beautiful. It was like blue on the top, and it was blue and white, and there's two beautiful reactors there, just modestly cranking out power for 3 million Spaniards, 3 to 4 million Spaniards. And then meanwhile, there was all sorts of future electronic waste that we call solar panels spread across the countryside, contributing to the instability of the Spanish grid. But this is the right picture. I think it's a mistake. It was an original sin of climate economics to go into the climate issue and say dealing with climate change is going to cost money. Why would it cost money when we're already moving towards decarbonization? Energy abundance is environmental progress. We didn't, in this period, when we moved to cleaner burning coal, then to natural gas, cleaner vehicles, other technical changes, and carbon monoxide declined 83%, lead declined 99%, sulfur dioxide 91%, nitrous oxide declined 61%. Did we get poorer during this period? This was a period where Americans became the richest people on earth, and we reduced our pollution. The idea that it is expensive to reduce pollution is a myth. It is something that happens in the process of technological innovation and these energy transitions. Let's take a closer look at energy. As Bjorn mentioned, there is no poor high-energy country, and there is no rich low-energy country. Sure, Germany can reduce its per capita energy consumption a little bit, but it can't get to Indian levels through energy efficiency and energy conservation. Energy is life and is prosperity. I'm really looking forward to hearing John's presentation on this later. It's something that we're learning more about why energy is the basis of all prosperity. And of course, energy consumption keeps going up. This is a good thing. We should look at these charts and understand what a blessing it is that all of our fellow human beings are finally able to live with dignity and wealth. What about decarbonization? Decarbonization of the economy is just reducing the amount of carbon emitted per unit of GDP. We also can talk about decarbonization of energy. That's just reducing the amount of carbon dioxide per unit of energy. But this is decarbonization of the economy. And as you can see here, climate policy, no climate policy, renewables, nuclear, it declines at a steady rate it has declined at a steady rate for the last 35 years. In fact, it goes back further. If you go all the way back to the 19th century, a steady rate of decarbonization without any requirement for policy. What the impact of climate policy does is just make electricity expensive. You can now see that the UK and Germany are in a fight to see who can be the most irrational country on the planet. UK now at an incredible 34 cents a kilowatt hour. The median is 20 cents. The United States at just 8 cents. It's just, if you were looking to destroy yourself as a civilization, you could hardly do any better than to make energy that expensive. We saw this very dramatically as a consequence of the anti-oil and gas activism starting around 2019, 2018, and you saw investors pull out of oil and gas. Well, the energy crisis hits, and we had a big energy crisis, and that ultimately resulted in the burning of more coal. So climate activism is good for increasing carbon pollution and undermining the basis of your civilization. As far as I can tell, that's all that climate activism and policy is good for. Let's take a closer look at Germany. You can see Germans have reduced somewhat their amount of electricity at a pretty significant cost to the country. It hasn't eliminated its reliance on fossil fuels by any means. Renewables remain a small part of total energy consumption. Again, primary energy consumption, it's back to where they were in maybe the mid-70s. That's not going to get you the massive reductions of carbon that they're imagining. And you can see the share of primary energy consumption from low carbon sources in Germany has just reached a little bit over 20%. It's not really a model for anybody. And really what's been happening is that the German energy prices have been so high that now their heavy industry is moving to China. This is extremely dangerous. Germany is still going to consume the chemicals that it's going to be producing from the BASF industrial facilities in China. They're just going to be produced in a way that is much more carbon intensive and much more polluting than they would have been had they remained in Germany and kept their nuclear power plants operating. And you can see here the Chinese imports into Europe are higher than ever. The number of company insolvencies in Germany, after having been declining from 2010 to 2020, are now increasing dramatically. This is the Germany is the industrial heartland of Europe. This is not just a Germany issue, this is a Europe issue. When people in the United States say that we're worried that Europe is killing itself, we're not saying that to be like mean. We're not saying that because we don't like Europe. We're saying it because we love Europe, and we're very concerned about what's happening to the cradle of Western civilization. All of the economic projections in Germany are negative. German economy has failed to grow since Merz took office. The consensus forecast for German GDP is somewhere between 1 and 1.5% per year. Those are unhappy numbers. Those are numbers that result in people being very, very unhappy with their leadership. And indeed, 75% of Germans today are dissatisfied with Merz. That's the highest disapproval ratings of any European leader in recent memory after being in office for such a short period of time. He is not long for office, I would say. Europe is going to have to spend, and it won't, but it would have to spend $3.5 trillion in electricity generation and infrastructure over the next decade. That's twice as much as is spent over the last decade. One thing I could be confident about is that is just not going to happen, blessedly. So why the panic? Like, how did we get to a point where functionally non-existent problem led the cradle of Western civilization, the cradle of science and rationality, to essentially commit civilizational suicide? I think there's a few reasons. The first is just Malthusianism. Thomas Malthus was a British economist who was raised by a father who just loved the Enlightenment, loved science and rationality, who would hear his father talk about the blessings of science and rationality. And Malthus, you get a picture of him, he was just kind of an angry guy. He really didn't like people very much. And he said, people will starve. You know, if we keep having all these babies, people will starve. What was that based on? Zero evidence. The population had been increasing for thousands of years. The human population had been succeeding. There was no evidence that we were going to outstrip food in 1799 when he wrote his atrocious book. All his book was good for was justifying the British starvation of the Irish. The Irish were exporting beef during their starvation, but the British justified it as well. It'll end up saving lives in the long term. We saw this in California. The initial campaigners against nuclear said things like this: if you're trying to get people aroused about what's going on, you can use the most emotional issue you find. These were not conservationists. These were angry, anti-human Malthusians. These are the people that go around saying that humans are a cancer on the earth. These are haters. They exist. They are powerful. They're in positions of power. I really didn't care about possible nuclear accidents because there's too many people anyway. I think that plain dirty, if you have a noble end, is fine. That was from one of the foundational anti-nuclear leaders, the Sierra Club. The leaders of the Sierra Club in the early 60s were these beautiful, pro-human conservationists. They had worked in the Manhattan Project. They'd come back to Berkeley, California. They wanted to protect beautiful spaces, and they knew that nuclear power was the greatest of all technologies. It was going to redeem the atrocities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nuclear energy was the golden promise, and it was going to produce abundant energy while protecting the natural environment. But the abundant energy is what the Malthusians hated. And that's why they decided to attack the nuclear power plants, not because nuclear was expensive or dangerous, but because it produced cheap and abundant power. If a doubling of the state's population in the next 20 years is encouraged by providing the power resources for this growth, California's scenic character will be destroyed. It's going to bring too many people into California. That's why they didn't like it. And that's why they set off to run the scare campaign that they did. The other dynamic that's been written about by sociologists for over 125 years, since Durkheim and Max Weber, is this process of secularization. People don't believe in God at the same levels that they did in the past. They don't believe that they're being watched by an external authority, and that creates an enormous amount of anxiety about how do we know what's moral? How do we justify moral behavior? This is an old problem with new manifestations, but we can certainly see it still in the data. Belief in God has declined dramatically from if you were born in the 1950s to if you were born in the 1990s. A growing number of American teens say that religion is not important at all. Percentage of Americans with no religious identity has risen significantly. And this is Americans, by the way. Europeans were secular, much more secular than we are. The problem of disbelieving in God, however, is not that a man ends up believing in nothing. Alas, it is much worse. He ends up believing anything. And it's not hard to find the theological language in the discourse. Climate change becomes a new external authority. You're guilty. We fell from nature by eating from the fruit of knowledge, technology, fossil fuels, modern agriculture, depending on your form of eco-primitivism. There's a vengeful nature God. There's no redemption, but you can avoid apocalypse by harmonizing with nature. You used to have to get right by God. Now you have to get right by nature, which is something that scientists, as the new priests, can understand. And of course, the climate deniers are the new witches who have to be excommunicated, shunned, demonized, sued, fined $1 million, censored. Really, no punishment is too great for these climate deniers who hate nature and are disobeying what our new gods are telling us. It's also a form of Gnosticism. Gnosticism is this idea, it was alternative cult religion around the same time as the birth of Christianity. The idea was that this world is irreparably damaged, the false world. You get your redemption by learning secret knowledge, hidden truths. That's why learning the truth about climate change is so much a higher priority for Al Gore and Greta Thunberg than actually reducing emissions. That's why they're just obsessed. That's why you hear people say things like, it's all much worse than you know. We have some secret knowledge about how actually these ecosystems are on the verge of falling apart. You just don't understand because you're in the grip of denial. That's all a kind of Gnostic discourse. As for the global polar bear population, however, it's doing great. It's been going up. My book, when I published my book in 2020, the polar bear specialist group basically said that it had no evidence that the population was going up or down. At the time, there were certainly some people that were claiming the population was going up. But what I wrote in my book was that we didn't know if the population was going up or down. The new polar bear specialist group, October 2024, notes buried way in the report. I mean, you got to go way into the report to read it because the scientists do not want you to know this. The population of polar bears is increasing. Those pesky polar bears not cooperating with our apocalyptic narrative. Finally, there's romanticism. You all remember Ewok Village. They just have such a good time in a primitive societies. Things were amazing when we relied on wood and dung as our primary source of energy. All of this, of course, this neo-primitivism comes from the great and troubling philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said that man is born free and everywhere is in chains. The reason for all of our problems is societal oppression and inequality. Where there's inequality, it's because people were mean. It's because of status and class differences. The germ of Marxism and socialism in there. For whatever reason, environmentalists love they love the Elizabethan era. I mean, I don't know what it is, but the British, they always imagine that the future, there's a lot of dancing around trees, and there's a longing. And I think we all understand that longing for community, for harmony, and there's something there that's missing. And we imagine that there's something wrong with society, something fundamentally wrong with society. And in order to get to that, we have to fundamentally change society. That means that we have to go from using our modern fuels to using the fuels that we used before all of this terrible modernity led us to feel so lonely and separated from each other. The idea is that pre-modern life is better. There's no real sex differences. Western civilization's got to go. Rousseau's ideas were tested out spectacularly about 50 years after he was writing in the French Revolution. The French Revolution decided they were going to create a society based strictly on reason. And they just ended up with a reign of terror where they just ended up slaughtering each other. You really couldn't operate the guillotines fast enough. This is all kind of congealed into really an anti-Western dogma. The basic picture is that the past is evil, and we're doomed unless we radically alter civilization. So you think about what every child is taught in almost every Western school in the world, is that Western civilization emerged from slavery, indigenous genocide, and colonialism. It resulted in the Holocaust and nuclear weapons, and it's going to end in nuclear war. And then once that threat of nuclear war went down, we said into climate change. The idea is that the victims are sacred authorities. Nature is the new authority. The problem, of course, for the discourse is that the victims don't agree on what the problem is. They'll say different things. And ultimately, this is a story that is just destined to undermine civilization. I mentioned Arnold Toynbee before. He talks about civilizations, when they decline, it's because the elites in the society stop believing in the older stories that gave rise to the civilization. Our civilization had a story before that, which was a story that said that all humans are created equal. We all have equal political rights, even if we might be different in wealth, that we would aspire towards freedom, rule of law, equal justice under the law. All of those presuppositions that gave rise to this brilliant Western civilization are now under assault. I could see this brilliantly in White Lotus. Did that make it to Europe? White Lotus, anyone? HBO? Nothing? Bjorn, I knew you White Lotus fan. White Lotus season 1 is amazing, guys. Family goes to Hawaii. It's a contemporary miniseries. Family goes to Hawaii. The girl in the family brings her friend. They're like going to Wesleyan or Swarthmore. It's sort of like Cambridge or, very fine universities. And they're getting this proper anti-Western education. And the young woman is lecturing the dad in the family about how terrible society is. And the dad says, maybe we should just feel shitty about ourselves. That's kind of what the goal of this is to make us feel bad and make us feel depressed for crimes of the past, for things that we didn't even do, but we're somehow sinners for it, a different version of original sin. And the son says, everything sucks at home. It's all dead. Kids are stuck on their phones. They're lonely. They're looking for something better. Little wonder that this dramatic, meaningful apocalyptic story appeals to them. The young woman tries to persuade her Hawaiian boyfriend that because his land was taken from his family, she tries to persuade him that he should steal from the white family that brought her to Hawaii. And then he says, but I don't steal from people. And she says, they stole all this from you. You know that. She wants revenge. That will deliver the justice that she's seeking. And he said, but it's different. These are different people than the people that stole land from my family. And she said, don't you see they're all the same people? And that is at the heart of this condemnation of Western civilization that is underneath not just this apocalyptic climate discourse, but all of the other radical left discourses that we hear today and that are predominant on campuses. What caused, climate change anxiety, a meta-analysis. One of the main findings is that climate change anxiety is positively related to climate action. Who are the people that get involved in climate action? They're children that are suffering from anxiety and depression, to psychiatric disorders. Others appear to have personality disorders, such as narcissism. That's the belief that you're special. I should be able to throw tomato soup on a Van Gogh painting. These are what a great sociologist in the United States called death works. The idea is that you want to attack the sacred symbols of your civilization. One of our finest works of art being defiled in this way, out of a kind of narcissistic sense, a Gnostic narcissism, that I have special insight into how the world is nobody else could possibly understand. And so I'm going to destroy this art. We also see a kind of histrionic personality disorder, constant attention seeking. She's moved on to Gaza, by the way. So that just tells you all you need to know about her motivations. It's excessively emotional. It's dramatic, speaks dramatically. My view personally is that Greta Thunberg is a victim of the European industrial media and NGO complex, which elevated somebody with obvious psychiatric disorders and who herself said that she was suffering from Asperger's syndrome and severe depression. And they elevated her into a leader and symbol of climate change activism. This was deeply irresponsible by the supposed adults in the room of Europe. Shame on all of them. Shame on the United Nations for putting her up on stage and letting her make an embarrassment of herself in front of everybody. She's as much of a victim of this as anybody else. All of this has come crashing down spectacularly. The Trump administration, I mean, this is what you get. The Trump administration has just cut the funding for climate science research. I doubt anybody in the room would be on board with just the slashing and burning of climate science research the Trump administration engaged in. But that's what you get when the entire community has been corrupted by an apocalyptic vision. Somebody's going to come along and say, enough. You're making our children sick. You're undermining the basis of our civilization. Enough is enough. And if that means we have to go to the root of it and cut the whole scientific community out of it, that's what they're going to do. And that's what's happened. And I predict that this will continue to happen, that we're not just in a trough, that this is the end of the period of climate hysteria. And the backlash is going to go further than probably any of us want it to go. But that's what you get when you end up engaging with this kind of extremist radicalism. Thank you guys very much.
We have now 30 minutes for questions, so you can...
Nothing?
There.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your presentation. I'm going to tell you a little short story, and then I will ask the question. Some months ago, I emailed Michael Shellenberger because I wanted him to make a presentation at a legal conference. My idea was organizing a legal conference from different points of view on energy law. And I wanted him to make a keynote presentation beforehand because I had the feeling that everyone in legal academia talks from an alarmistic perspective. And I wanted him to make that keynote speech just to say, there's another approach, another possible approach. And he accepted. But then I put together a list of speakers, and the higher we got in terms of top-tier European scholars, they told me, if he's there, I won't go there. So my question would be...
Such snowflakes.
My question is, does this still happen in US? There's still some alarmistic people that will not join you to debate with you, or is it changing a little bit?
I haven't seen any change. I think it will come, though. I mean, I was offered a significant amount of money to debate on climate in Canada, and I was looking forward to it. I was like, wow, I get to debate and get paid. And they offer that same amount of money, and they couldn't find anybody willing to take it. So, yeah, I mean, does it still happen? I mean, I lost most of my friends because of my book and because of my work. You know, when this is your God, when your whole religious worldview and your sense of yourself and your identity is tied up with this idea that I'm a good person because I'm apocalyptic about climate change and I'm out there spreading the word and spreading the good news of renewables, it's deeply threatening at a psychological and spiritual level for people. I mean, it's like going up to, it's just like a cost. I mean, actually, I was about to say it's like going up to, to like Christians and, telling them that God is not real. But in fact, I never see Christians respond in that way. They're much more, I find that the climate alarmists are just much more fragile in their belief system. And I think it's because it is a more fragile belief system. It rests upon nothing. I mean, for me, like the sea level rise acceleration was just like, I was just kind of like, I can't believe that even I am still following for this nonsense. It's just, I mean, can't think of, I mean, there's very few issues where kind of everything people believe is wrong on the basic facts. And so, yeah, I mean, but by the way, nice to meet you. Nice to see you in person. I'm sorry it didn't work out, but I'm glad this did.
I had a question about the increase in victimization.
Yeah.
It seems like the threshold of what is a victim is increasing. I mean, like, I feel he makes me uncomfortable. Is now
Right.
rationale for being a victim.
Right.
So perhaps you could expound on that and how it's related to this psychological divide. But another aspect is the lawfare aspect, using the law to actually smash renewable projects or other projects which would be decarbonizing. Any thoughts about that?
Sure. So, I mean, climate issue was experiencing cancel culture before cancel culture became famous or even named as cancel culture. And just to, shout out to my friend Bjorn Lomborg. I mean, he took a huge amount of grief and stuck with it to his great credit. And I mean, it is the amount of, I mean, we all of us have been through here can tell you story after story after story around our own personal mistreatment. I mean, and I'm not even trying to play the victim. We've survived. So we're like survivors of the climate cancellation. But in order to do that, this kind of bad behavior to people, trying to get them fired, getting their grants cut off, getting them censored on social media platforms, these are such nasty behaviors that it makes sense that the person that is engaging in them begins by describing themselves as a victim of the person they're trying to oppress. So it's called DARVO, which is it's a strategy that's used. It came out of domestic violence work actually, which is called when you're accused of battering your wife. It's I think it's DARVO is defend, attack, and reverse victim and oppressor. So I say that to say that the people who say that they're victims, I don't actually know that they think that they're victims. There was just a new study that came out showing the huge number of students that are claiming to be disabled at Stanford and Harvard. And I was like, do they really think that they're disabled, or are they saying that so they can get more time to study on the test? So it's kind of competitive victimization has become a kind of status for people to claim to be victims because people want to be able to claim some sort of ability to overcome authority, but it's also a way to engage in immoral behavior against people. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think we all sort of saw this on climate, the cancel culture, and then you sort of see it on things like race and trans and stuff like that. And then we kind of like, okay, that's bad, but it couldn't get any worse. Well, no, then it became censorship, and it became the censorship industrial complex after 2016, where we see this model, and I'll be speaking to the European Parliament about it on Wednesday, but this model where basically the government goes and authorizes NGOs and academics to decide what the truth is, to do fact-checking and trust flagging, as trusted flaggers, and then they go and tell the social media platforms, okay, here's all the stuff you should be censoring. Bjorn Lomborg, Michael Shellenberger, they should be censored on Facebook. And we were. For saying accurate things, for telling the truth about climate change, we were censored. And then you thought, well, it couldn't get any worse than that. But it did. They murdered Charlie Kirk. And then after he was murdered, and everybody saw him being murdered on social media, progressives, I mean, it was shocking. They went onto social media to celebrate it. When your culture is celebrating the murder of your political opponents, you're pretty far gone. You're certainly pretty far gone from where Western civilization was in 1776 and 1789. The share of college students that say that violence may be necessary to stop a campus speaker rose from under 20% in the year 2020 to 33% today. Those are like civilization destroying numbers when a third of your college students think that 50% of Democrats say that murder may be justified to stop Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Murdering somebody is the most extreme form of censorship. So I think we're in a really perilous time. I hope that we've hit bottom, though I'm afraid I'm not sure that we have. Hi.
Anybody else has a mic, please? Go.
Hi, do you hear me now? Okay. So do you think that these political and cultural elites, they really believe in the climate change discourse? Or is just like a form of control and taxing more? Because it's obvious that the lower part of society, they do believe this discourse, but the higher part, do you think they believe it or it's just like form of control?
this is a very interesting psychological question. We've known for 100 years at least that a lot of our behaviors and beliefs are unconscious or subconscious. On the case of climate change, the best evidence that we have around how climate scientists that are engaged in constructing the alarmist discourse talk to each other emerged from a set of emails that were hacked out of East Anglia, London. It was called ClimateGate. I think it's 2009. And what you see there is scientists discussing how to use illegitimate strategies to keep people out of peer-reviewed research. But at no point did they say that, oh, we all know that climate change is not a big deal or something like that. It was more like the ends justify the means. So the way I would describe it is that if you're a real hater, like if you just hate civilization, if you're like a Thomas Malthus type, we can get into like what that is and how you might get there. But let's just start with like, if you're that type of person and you're going into climate change research to show that we're on the path towards apocalypse and to show that humans are a cancer on the earth, then you're going to justify all sorts of bad, unscientific behavior because the ends justify the means. I'm trying to save the world from apocalypse. But it's very contradictory because when you actually listen to how people talk about it, it's sort of like, well, the Western civilization is evil. It's causing climate change, which is going to destroy Western civilization. So we have to stop climate change. But I thought you just said that civilization was evil. So which is it? You want to destroy civilization or do you want to save it? I think it's a revenge fantasy. I'm reminded by what a philosopher once said when he would go to when you look at Christian paintings from like the 16th or 17th century. And, Christianity is a religion of love. I'm a Christian myself, so I'm not bagging on Christians. But it's a religion of love, and yet in all these paintings by Christians, there's scenes of them punishing their enemies. They would paint like the priest they hated, and they make his face the devil's face. So I just think it's emerging like that kind of hatred. It's emerging in a way that's actually blind to the person that's in the grip of that religion. I don't think that Malthus was saying, oh, I'm going to devise a secret plan to starve people and to justify, cutting off food supplies. But that his hatred of humanity could be seen in the conclusions that he was coming to. But they weren't conclusions, they were presuppositions from the beginning of that work. Does that help at all? Yeah, Fernand.
Yes, first of all, thank you for this fantastic presentation. I have a question coming back to what the politicians did to the academics, actually, when they decided to stop subsidizing like climate science. Personally, I think it's a good thing also for gender studies, and I have many others that we should also perhaps stop subsidizing. But the issue here is, aren't we violating academic freedom? Where is the line? When can we do this? Because basically, I think that the academic community should regulate itself. So is there something wrong now in the academic community that prevents it from regulating itself and lowering its standards? And if so, what can be done to raise the standards again so that the academic community is living up to what we all expect from it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, look at, Bjorn, myself, Roger Pilkey. We're not, I'm a university professor now, but at a new university, but we're like not in the academy. I mean, Roger Pilkey was falsely accused of being paid by fossil fuel interests on the basis of zero evidence. None of his colleagues talked to him about it. I mean, it was like national news. It was like discussed on Jon Stewart. And it was a member of Congress that was attacking him as being secretly funded by the fossil fuel industry. Not a single one of Roger Pilkey's colleagues at the university talked to him about this, to even lend, because sometimes what you'll get is like hey, I'm with you, but I can't say anything like that. He didn't even get that. So the universities are absolutely broken. I mean, that's why the Trump administration, when they come in, they're just like, we're just going to get rid of all that. They're just, how do you clean that up? There's a big debate in the United States right now between people that are sort of in our side of things. And there's a debate around whether like the government needs to impose some controls on universities. There's other people that say, no, we have to protect the autonomy of universities. I think my view is that if it's public funding, then it should come with certain conditions. The taxpayers should not be paying for ideologically and politically motivated anti-human, anti-Western civilization dogma like they are currently paying for. If universities want to do that kind of stuff on their own with their own money and their own students' parents' money, then it seems to me that's fine. Universities are so badly broken right now that, I mean, like we're starting a new university in Austin, but we're so small. We're like I think we're like 200, 300 people now, and it's going to take a really long time. So this is a huge problem. There's some people that are out there saying things like, oh, wokeism is dead. And, and certainly you feel it on climate change, and like that nature retraction that I mentioned has been heavily covered in the news media. But the universities are still controlled by maniacs, and the conventional news media, which in Europe is funded by governments, is controlled by maniacs. So yeah, I think we're in a very dangerous period because we're in between two different moments in history, from a globalist era that lasted from 1945 to 2024 and 2025 and on, which I think will be a reversion to some greater form of nationalism. But it's an exceedingly dangerous moment, and one that I think requires this kind of honesty and truthfulness. Gentleman in the back.
Can I, in the meanwhile?
Oh, sorry.
May I? Thank you. I'm thinking about what you said about European or Western people feeling guilty about climate change and how that roots in our cultural sense of sin. So I'm wondering, have you found any difference regarding your personal position to climate change in Eastern countries, which roots are not related? They do believe in some kind of fall, but not inherited sin.
Yes, no question about it. It's like the climate discourse is perfectly fits this as a substitute faith or anti-faith for where Christianity was. And if you look at the most woke people in the United States, the most climate alarmists, the most woke people, they're almost always like children of Protestants or like grandchildren of Protestants. And you're absolutely right. I'd be curious, Bjorn, if you've ever been to Japan. When you go to Japan, because the Japanese there's always like, we're trying to do all this stuff on climate. Like, we're doing these things on climate. And it was always like, you could tell that the Japanese were sort of like, we're doing it just because like you guys are pressuring us to do it. But it didn't have that fervor that it has in the United States and in Britain. And similarly, so I think, in other words, I'm agreeing with you. I think that these supposedly secular religious discourses are serving as substitutes almost perfectly. So you do have a new form of sin and, new forms of redemption and apocalypse. And for the Japanese, who have a spiritual system based on ancestor worship, it's not there. They'll still talk about the things that they're doing on climate change, but it's clearly just to make Westerners happy.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
We do have some very serious environmental problems, mainly biodiversity loss and human encroachment on wildlife spaces. And it is my feeling, I'd like to know if you share it, that one of the problems is that most of the money that is going into this climate thing is being detracted from our efforts to fix these problems. Yeah. And that many environmental NGOs are actually shifting from their what they were doing in pro of the environment into this climate nonsense. Do you agree with that?
It already shifted. I mean, that happened, 10 or 20 years ago, that shifted. I mean, our opponents on stopping, like we were trying to stop this wind project from being built on the East Coast, which was killing whales. Our opponents were the conservation groups. They've lost the plot. And by the way, it's a complicated situation because they had written, all the big conservation groups had written a letter, which is kind of a formal petition to the government, describing the impacts of a potential wind project on these whales. And then, but the political dynamics kicked in, and the same groups then endorsed this huge industrial wind farm with the support of these environmental groups. It's just became a kind of dogma. All renewables good. It's actually a denial of reality, so that renewables kind of by definition could not harm the environment and could only help the environment. Similarly, climate change by definition could not be good for people. It can only be bad. So, I mean, the biggest rage I see sometimes Bjorn get or I get is when you point out that, there's some benefits to climate change. Greater greening, carbon fertilization, fewer people die from heat than from cold. People can't stand it. They get really upset because you violated this very Manichaean black and white way of thinking. On the broader issue of biodiversity, I 100% agree. It's even worse than that in the sense that how do you pull pressure away from sensitive ecological places? In my book, Apocalypse Never, I describe both the Amazon and also the rainforests of Africa. And the way you do that, the way you pull pressure away is you have urbanization. So people move to the city and they abandon low productivity agriculture, which is miserable. In Africa, there's like all these conflicts between people and wildlife. You know, the orangutans and the gorillas. I mean, that's the threat to the wildlife is from people that are desperate. And so industrialization and urbanization is good for people. It's also good for the natural environment. It takes pressure off of that. And so that's how you end up. I should have included here, but, and I think Bjorn mentioned it too, but as we become more efficient, we produce food. We produce about twice as much food per unit of land that we did in 1960. And that incredible amount of efficiency means that the grasslands can return to former farms, and then eventually those grasslands can convert into forests. That's the right picture of environmental protection and progress. And unfortunately, people have a really dumb picture, which is just that more people, more prosperity, more growth, less nature. It really works the exact opposite of that.
Hi, Michael, great presentation. Really enjoy that.
Thank you.
So now that you've convinced us that, climate change is nothing we need to worry about, I have to say you have in the past been known as an advocate for industrial policy for nuclear. Would you now say that that's no longer necessary? Would you now agree that we don't have to, have such government intervention at such great expense?
Fair question. What is my view of nuclear? And I'll say, my position on climate, I think, I'm much more worried about climate if we're at 4 or 5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Part of my own relaxation of climate is that, as I showed earlier with that RCP 8.5 scenario not being on the cards, that we're still in the midst of a natural gas revolution. If Europe would stop suppressing gas production, it could produce a lot more gas. And then nuclear has a huge number of economic and national security benefits that are aside from climate change. And in fact, it's worth pointing out that most of the nuclear in the world, maybe all of the nuclear power plants that we've built, were built for non-climate reasons. Even the environmental justifications were kind of weak. The demand for nuclear really came from the demand for power, and then to some extent from an attempt to kind of redeem the technology from the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I still think that that's probably what will happen, is that it's going to be rising power demand for data centers that will pull nuclear into the market. And in terms of industrial policy, it's modest. I would say some amount of tax credits, rate base may be necessary, or maybe, as I mentioned before, Microsoft, just bought up all the power to restart 3 Mile Island. I'm just really focused on what works. The lowest cost and the lowest public investment necessary to bring nuclear into the market. But I don't think it needs the kind of heavy-handed subsidies that we've seen with renewables.
Do you think regrowth thinking is succeeding because it is being widely demonstrated that capitalism is the best system we know to generating wealth? So how they are changing the objective from grow to grow less in order to, according to them, sum us?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch it all.
Yeah.
Can you say it one more time?
Si le hablo en español.
Sí, habla en español, está bien.
Que tú piensas que están cambiando el discurso de, en plan, como ha quedado demostrado que el capitalismo es el sistema que conocemos, que capaz de generar la mayor riqueza para el conjunto de la sociedad, han querido cambiar el objetivo de estar mejor a, entre comillas, salvarnos decreciendo, porque si seguimos a este nivel, digamos que llega el apocalipsis, como nos quieren vender ellos. ¿Tú piensas que ¿Eso puede explicar un poco el cambio que hemos visto en el último siglo, digamos, de pensamiento en ese sentido? ¿Piensas que es una realidad o...?
I think I still need some help. What? Oh. Is climate change another way to attack capitalism? Yes. Yes. Yep. Although I would say it's a little. I would go deeper than that. I think that the hatred of capitalism is coming from somewhere deep. I mentioned Malthus. So the objection, I think, is similar. I think there's just people that are haters. I don't know how else to describe it. They hate humans. They hate society. They don't want to see, like we all in this room, you might go, oh my God, it's great. All these people, the Chinese have all become middle class. It's a beautiful thing. They go, oh no, they hate that. And we could get into why that is, but I think that's a deeper drive. I think that if it were some other system that were resulting in human flourishing, they would hate that system. You know what I mean? So if socialism were outperforming capitalism in terms of human benefits, then they would hate socialism. Does that make sense? In fact, they actually, you'll note that even in a communist, what is China? Communist politically, at least, is now attacked for similar reasons that climate activists attacked capitalism.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I want to summarize some of your points that I have appreciated, like secularization, lack of God believing in young people, activist climate, new religion, and I will add a couple of similar things in my opinion. That is woke movement, globalist 2030 agenda. Okay. These are my premises, your premises also. Don't you think that we have, as a civilization, 21st century civilization, don't you think that we are navigating in the wrong rumbo, no? And my question is, don't you believe that we have to come back without forgetting the progress of all of these centuries? We have to come back to the roots of Occidental civilization that was born in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries as an example of those knowledge, those successful centuries, the School of Salamanca of the Spanish Empire. That's all.
Yeah, I think that I think we need to come back to so there was the Enlightenment secularized Christianity, right? So Christianity said that it basically created the idea that all are equal before God. That was the innovation of Christianity. And then the Enlightenment just said, well, we're all equal. And when you get to the Declaration of Independence, it says, all men are created equal because we're endowed by our Creator. So they sort of say, well, you have these natural rights that are given to you by something, and they said, well, we'll bracket whether it's God. So we have a secular government, but it rests upon these Judeo-Christian values of valuing all human life, rather than the older Greco-Roman view, which was that some people are the good and the beautiful and the powerful, and then there's the slaves or the weak and the ugly that should be dominated. There's basically two types of civilization, right? There's just Western civilization, which holds that all people are created equal and they deserve natural rights, and then there's everything else, which is tribal, ruled by the strong. So I guess if your question is, do we need to come back to the earlier view, which is that, all men are created equal, then my answer is yes. But if you mean that do we need to go back to an earlier view where we have to make everybody believe in the Christian God, I would say no. Am I getting there or no?
No, sorry to interrupt you, but we just have 5 minutes, so we need to give the floor to somebody else that couldn't ask in the morning. So I'm sorry for doing this.
I'm here all night. We can talk after.
Yeah, we have a pause afterwards, so you can approach him and you need to you can speak already.
Hi, Michael. My name is Marisa. I came from Malaga. We are one of the hundreds of associations in Spain defending the territory for different reasons, each of us. What has happened now in Spain is the Wild West. There is a colonization. Our territory is of sacrifice. And we have had talks for almost a year with national NGOs, Greenpeace, SEO, BirdLife, WWF, Ecologists in Action, and Friends of the Earth. For a year, we couldn't get to an agreement that what was happening in all the areas in Spain, it could be farmland or it could be protected areas as well. There is no planification, and there are thousands, literally thousands of projects. It could be around more than 3,000 mega projects of windmills and solar panels in Spain, not even counting the methane, the hydrogen, and everything else. So even using their own source of information, which is the panel, the IPCC, when you see these wheels, when they talk about the CO2, the most important thing, even more than CO2, is the loss of biodiversity. That's what they are worried about. But precisely we are seeing that all these windmills, photovoltaic, and everything that is precisely doing that. We are losing biodiversity, and we are going towards, now we know the purpose. It was the data centers. Now we know why we needed so much electricity suddenly. And one wonders, with all that is going on with artificial intelligence, if we are the Mayans of the future.
Wow. Was that a question or yes? Yes. We're destroying the environment in order to save it. That's what's happened. I did a TEDx talk on why renewables can't save the planet, and that's what we argued is that, of course, it ends up becoming a self-fulfilling and self-defeating prophecy that in the name of saving the environment, we destroy it. And all the ways in which we've actually saved the environment was just trying to improve human lives. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.